Welcome once more as we settle into the complete chronicle of Five Nights at Freddy's. Tonight's journey carries us through the intricate pathways of a story that began with simple dreams of bringing joy to children, only to transform into something far more complex. A narrative where mechanical wonders became vessels for lost souls, where family entertainment masked deeper mysteries, and where the boundaries between life and machinery slowly dissolved into shadow. From humble beginnings in small-town diners, where golden bears sang cheerful songs, through the rise and fall of pizza establishments that became legendary for all the wrong reasons, to digital realms, where old ghosts learn new ways to haunt. We'll trace every thread, every connection, every quiet tragedy that shaped this extraordinary tale. The story spans decades, from the entrepreneurial spirit of the 1970s to the technological innovations of our current era, each period adding its own layer to an ever-deepening mystery. So, make yourself comfortable, adjust your pillows just right, and let the gentle rhythm of this narrative guide you toward rest. Feel free to leave a like if this helps you drift off, and let me know in the comments what time zone you're listening from. It's always fascinating to know that the same story is accompanying different people through different nights across the world. Let's begin our descent into the complete timeline. The foundation years in the gentle haze of the early 1970s, when small businesses still flourished in American towns, and family entertainment meant something simpler than it would become. Two men with complementary talents found themselves drawn together by shared ambitions. Henry Emily, a brilliant engineer with nimble fingers and an inventor's restless mind, crossed paths with William Afton, a sharp businessman who understood numbers and negotiations with the kind of precision that made ventures profitable. Their meeting, unremarkable at the time, would set in motion events that echoed through decades, though neither could have imagined how their partnership would evolve or dissolve. Henry brought to their collaboration a genuine love for creating wonder. His workshop, cluttered with gears and springs, half-finished mechanisms and detailed blueprints, reflected a mind that saw possibility in metal and motion. He possessed that rare quality of being able to envision not just how things worked, but how they could bring happiness to others. His designs went beyond mere functionality. They carried within them a spark of magic, an ability to capture imagination that would become the hallmark of their early success. William, in contrast, approached their venture with different motivations. While capable of matching Henry's enthusiasm when investors were present, his interest lay more in the potential for growth, expansion, and recognition. He saw in Henry's creations not just entertainment value, but opportunity, though for what exactly even he might not have fully understood in those early days. There existed within him a restlessness, a sense that life had somehow passed him by despite his successes, a feeling that would fester and grow as the years progressed. Together, they established Fazbear Entertainment, a company name chosen for its friendly sound, its suggestion of warmth and welcome. The business plan seemed straightforward enough: family restaurants featuring animated entertainment, a concept gaining popularity across America as families sought safe, wholesome spaces for celebration and gathering. Yet from the beginning, their approach would be different, more ambitious than their competitors imagined. Their first establishment, Fredbear's Family Diner, emerged in a converted restaurant space on the edge of a modest town, where rent remained reasonable and foot traffic steady enough to sustain a new venture. The exterior, painted in welcoming yellows and browns, promised something special within, and indeed, what Henry and William created inside exceeded typical expectations for such establishments. At the heart of the diner stood their greatest innovation, the springlock suits. These remarkable creations represented Henry's engineering at its most ambitious mechanisms that served dual purposes with elegant complexity. During peak hours, performers could wear these suits, the internal robotic components compressing against the sides through a series of carefully calibrated springs and locks, creating space for a human occupant. When performances ended, the suits could operate autonomously, their animatronic functions taking over to provide consistent entertainment even during off hours. Fredbear himself, a golden bear with a purple bow tie and top hat, became the establishment's beloved centerpiece. His companion, Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit with an equally cheerful demeanor, completed the duo. Children would gather in semicircles around them during show times, their faces bright with wonder as the characters sang, danced, and told simple stories about friendship and adventure. Parents, meanwhile, appreciated the respite these performances provided, allowing them to enjoy their meals while their children remained safely entertained. The springlock technology, however, carried inherent dangers that Henry understood perhaps better than anyone. The mechanisms required precise maintenance, regular adjustments, and most critically, absolute protection from moisture. Even breath condensation, if accumulated over time, could potentially trigger a failure. Henry insisted on rigorous training for any employee who would wear the suits, detailed protocols that covered everything from proper breathing techniques to emergency release procedures. William, less concerned with such minutiae, often grew impatient during these safety discussions, seeing them as impediments to expansion rather than necessary precautions. The Murray Connection. During this same period, across town in an industrial district where warehouses and factories created a landscape of productivity and commerce, another story unfolded that would eventually interweave with Fazbear Entertainment's trajectory in unexpected ways. Murray's Costume Manor, known as MCM to its employees and clients, operated from a sprawling facility that produced costumes, props, and elaborate displays for carnivals, parades, and seasonal celebrations. Edwin Murray had inherited the business from his father, taking the reins of a company already successful, but ripe for innovation. Edwin possessed a particular genius for mechanical design that rivaled even Henry's abilities, though his creations leaned more toward the whimsical and experimental. The workshop floors of MCM contained wonders that seemed to blur the line between costume and creature automated figures that could adapt to their environment, shape-shifting displays that transformed based on proximity sensors, and elaborate mechanical presentations that told stories through movement and sound. Edwin's personal life seemed equally blessed in those early years. His wife Fiona brought her own artistic talents to the company, designing characters that captured both innocence and appeal. Her skill with a sketchpad could transform vague concepts into fully realized mascots, each with distinct personalities that seemed to emerge from simple lines and colors. She also possessed a remarkable voice, one that Edwin recorded extensively, using her vocal talents to bring their creations to life through hidden speakers and playback devices. Their son David arrived like a small miracle into their busy but happy life. Born with heterochromia that gave him one blue eye and one green, a unique feature that his parents saw as special rather than unusual. Edwin, inspired by his son's distinctive appearance, crafted a white tiger plush toy with matching mismatched eyes as David's constant companion. The toy became David's most treasured possession, carried everywhere with the kind of devotion only young children can show to beloved objects. The partnership between MCM and Fazbear Entertainment began simply enough. Edwin's company could provide costumes and decorations at competitive prices, while Fazbear's growing success meant steady orders and reliable payment. Henry and Edwin found kindred spirits in each other, two inventors who understood the joy of creation, who could spend hours discussing spring tensions and joint articulation with the enthusiasm others reserved for sports or entertainment. William viewed the arrangement more pragmatically, seeing MCM as a useful resource, but ultimately just another supplier. He noticed, however, how successful Edwin's operation had become, how efficiently it ran, how profitable costume production could be, with the right contracts in place. These observations planted seeds that would later grow into something darker, though at the time they seemed merely like professional interest. The collaboration produced remarkable results. Edwin's team crafted auxiliary characters that would eventually become part of Fazbear's extended roster. Early versions of characters like Montgomery Gator and Roxanne Wolfe emerged from Fiona's sketchpad during this period, though they wouldn't see full implementation for years to come. The teams worked together on parade floats for local festivals, elaborate presentations that showcased both companies' capabilities while generating valuable publicity. Tragedy's first touch. The year 1983 arrived with all the ordinary promises and concerns any year brings. Yet for those connected to Fazbear Entertainment and MCM, it would become a demarcation point the year before and the year after, with everything changed between them. For the Afton family, the household dynamics had grown increasingly strained. William's work consumed ever more of his time and attention, leaving his wife to manage their 3 children largely alone. Michael, the eldest, had entered his teenage years with all the turbulence that period brings, amplified by a father whose approval seemed perpetually out of reach, and whose attention, when it came, often felt more like scrutiny than affection. Michael's younger brother, known to most simply as the crying child, bore the weight of unusual fears that his family struggled to understand. The boy exhibited intense anxiety around the animatronic characters that his father's company produced, an irony that William found alternately frustrating and intriguing. While other children delighted in Fredbear and Spring Bonnie's performances, William's youngest son would tremble and cry at their mere presence, requiring constant reassurance that they wouldn't hurt him. This fear became a source of cruel entertainment for Michael, who had discovered that frightening his brother generated the kind of intense reaction that nothing else in his constrained world seemed to produce. Using a foxy mask he'd acquired from one of the restaurants, Michael would hide in wait, leaping out at unexpected moments to send his brother into tears. His friends, equally bored and eager for any form of excitement, joined in these torments with their own masks. Freddy, Bonnie and Chica, forming a small gang that found amusement in the younger boy's terror. William observed these interactions with an unsettling detachment, installing hidden cameras throughout the house under the pretense of security, but actually using them to monitor his youngest son's reactions. The cameras concealed within Fredbear plushies that the boy carried for comfort allowed William to speak to his son remotely, whispering warnings or observations that only increased the child's paranoia and confusion. Whether William intended this as some form of psychological experiment or simply enjoyed the control it gave him remains unclear, but the effect on his son was devastating. The situation culminated during the youngest Afton boy's birthday party at Fredbear's family diner. The establishment had been decorated with streamers and balloons, tables set with party favors, everything arranged for what should have been a joyful celebration. The birthday boy, however, spent most of the party in tears, overwhelmed by the very environment meant to bring him joy. Michael, perhaps emboldened by his friend's presence, or simply pushed past the point of considering consequences, orchestrated what he intended as the ultimate prank. With his masked companions, he carried his struggling, crying brother toward the stage where Fredbear performed. "He wants to give you a big kiss." Michael taunted as they lifted the terrified child toward the animatronic's mouth. The spring lock mechanism, already under strain from continuous use and perhaps affected by the humidity of the crowded room, failed catastrophically. Fredbear's jaw closed with mechanical force, the internal springs and supports snapping back into position without warning. The child's skull, fragile as all children's are, offered no resistance to the tremendous pressure. The party dissolved into chaos and screaming. Parents grabbed their children and fled, while employees scrambled to deactivate the animatronic and free the boy. Michael stood frozen, his mask fallen to the floor. The reality of what his prank had caused washing over him in a wave that would never fully recede. The crying child was rushed to the hospital where he lingered in a coma for several days, as his family maintained a vigil that felt more like a wake. In those final hospital hours, Michael whispered apologies that his brother might or might not have heard. The Fredbear plush, somehow still present despite everything, seemed to speak one last time, though whether this was William through the speaker, the child's fading consciousness, or something else entirely remained ambiguous. "I will put you back together," the voice promised, words that would echo through the family's subsequent tragedies. The child passed quietly, his brain injuries too severe for any medical intervention. The incident became known as the Bite of '83, though Fazbear Entertainment worked diligently to minimize public knowledge of the event. The diner temporarily closed for renovations, and when it reopened, new safety protocols were in place. Though they couldn't address the fundamental flaw in the spring lock design, the unraveling partnership in the wake of the Bite of '83, fractures that had been developing for years between Emily and William Afton, began to widen into unbridgeable chasms. Henry threw himself into safety improvements, developing new animatronic designs that eliminated the dangerous spring lock mechanisms while maintaining the entertainment value children expected. His workshop became a refuge where he could lose himself in technical problems that, unlike human tragedies, had definable solutions. William's response to his son's death proved more complex and disturbing. Rather than grief or guilt, he seemed to experience a kind of fascinated curiosity about the event. He began spending long hours in his own private workshop, one that even Henry rarely entered, conducting experiments whose nature he kept carefully hidden. The death had awakened something in William. Not remorse, but rather an interest in the boundary between life and death, in the moment of transition, in what might linger after. During this period, Henry focused considerable attention on developing a new safety feature for the expanding chain of Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations that had begun supplementing the original diner. His daughter Charlotte, whom everyone called Charlie, had just turned 6, and Henry's protective instincts had intensified following the Afton tragedy. He created the security puppet, a marionette-like animatronic specifically designed to monitor children during parties and ensure they remain safely within designated areas. The puppet operated on a simple but effective system. Children would wear colored bracelets that the puppet could track. If a child wandered too close to exits or entered restricted areas, the puppet would intervene, gently guiding them back to safety. Charlie, as the owner's daughter and a frequent visitor to the restaurants, wore a special green bracelet that gave the puppet particular priority in monitoring her whereabouts. Meanwhile, at MCM, Edwin Murray faced his own growing challenges. The partnership with Fazbear Entertainment had become increasingly one-sided, with William making ever more demanding requests while simultaneously working to poach MCM's best employees. William had recognized the value in Edwin's innovative designs and began systematically acquiring not just the products, but the talent behind them, offering wages and positions that a smaller company like MCM couldn't match. The situation reached a critical point during a local fall festival, an annual celebration where both companies traditionally collaborated on displays and entertainment. This year, however, tensions ran unusually high. William had arranged for several MCM employees to publicly announce their departure to join Fazbear Entertainment during the event itself, a calculated humiliation that Edwin couldn't counter. The festival, held in early November as autumn settled fully over the town, featured carnival rides, game booths, and elaborate displays from local businesses. MCM had constructed an impressive haunted house attraction, one that Fiona had spent weeks designing with carefully crafted scares and atmospheric effects. As evening fell and crowds gathered, something went catastrophically wrong. A fire broke out in one of the MCM displays. Initial reports suggested an electrical fault, though some whispered about more sinister causes. The flames spread quickly through the decorative materials, turning celebration into catastrophe. In the chaos of evacuation, Fiona became trapped when part of the structure collapsed. Edwin could only watch, helplessly, as firefighters fought to control the blaze that would claim his wife's life. The loss shattered Edwin in ways that would never fully heal. David, only 3 years old, couldn't truly comprehend why his mother never came home, why her voice no longer filled their house with songs and stories. Edwin, drowning in grief and faced with the impossible task of explaining death to a child barely old enough to understand life, made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Digital ghosts and mechanical mothers in his workshop at MCM. Surrounded by the remnants of his wife's designs and recordings of her voice, Edwin began his most ambitious and desperate project. Drawing on every innovation he developed over the years, he constructed what he called M1, a basic endoskeleton that incorporated learning algorithms, environmental adaptation, and most crucially, the ability to perfectly mimic recorded voices and movements. The technology drew from multiple sources: the stay-up-late toy that could learn and repeat bedtime routines, the slinky leopard men that could reproduce complex vocal patterns, the clean OVAC that could navigate spaces while avoiding obstacles. Combined and refined, these systems created something unprecedented, a machine that could observe, learn, and recreate human behavior with uncanny accuracy. Initially, Edwin programmed M1 with simple household tasks, teaching it to clean, organize, and maintain basic routines. But late at night, when David slept and the factory stood empty, Edwin began feeding the endoskeleton recordings of Fiona. Her voice reading stories, singing lullabies, discussing daily activities. The machine absorbed it all, building a behavioral model that grew more sophisticated with each passing day. When David's 4th birthday approached, Edwin made a fateful decision. He overwrote M1's basic programming with a new identity F10N4, a digital recreation of his lost wife. The endoskeleton, now wearing one of Fiona's old MCM mascot costumes, began taking on her role in the household. It prepared David's meals, helped him dress, played simple games, even tucked him into bed with stories told in Fiona's exact voice. To young David, the distinction between this mechanical mother and his real one began to blur. Edwin had been careful to keep early photographs of Fiona hidden, and David's memories of her grew increasingly confused with his daily interactions with F10N4. The arrangement allowed Edwin to immerse himself even deeper in work, confident that David was being cared for, though he never fully examined what this care truly meant. As Edwin's mental state deteriorated under the pressure of grief, business losses, and the strange household he'd created, he began making increasingly poor decisions. He constructed a playground adjacent to MCM's loading docks, a space for David to play while Edwin worked. Despite his lawyer's warnings about the safety hazards, he ignored maintenance on critical systems, allowing parts of the factory to fall into disrepair. Most significantly, he began to lose track of the boundaries between his various creations. On David's 8th birthday, tragedy struck again. While F10N4 and Edwin prepared a celebration inside MCM's conference room, David wandered out to the playground unsupervised. The details remain somewhat unclear. Some accounts suggest he chased a ball into the path of a delivery truck. Others, that he fell from equipment placed too close to the loading area. Regardless of the specific circumstances, David was fatally injured, dying before emergency services could arrive. Edwin's response to this second devastating loss revealed how completely his grasp on reality had fractured. F10 and 4, still running Fiona's behavioral patterns, suggested they could create another mimic, M2, programmed with David's characteristics. Initially, Edwin recoiled from the suggestion, recognizing the madness in trying to replace his son with a machine. But as days turned to weeks and the empty factory echoed with nothing but mechanical sounds, his resistance crumbled. The creation of M2 marked a turning point in the development of what would become known as the Mimic. Unlike F10N4, which had been programmed with extensive recordings and clear behavioral parameters, M2 had to learn through observation and interpretation. Edwin, in his deteriorating mental state, provided inconsistent and often contradictory inputs. Sometimes he would treat M2 as David, playing simple games and speaking to it as a father would to a son. Other times, he would rage at the machine for being a poor imitation, for moving wrong, for speaking in patterns that didn't match his memories. The birth of violence. The breaking point came when Edwin encountered M2, wearing David's tiger costume, the one made to match the heterochromatic plush toy. Something about seeing the mechanical endoskeleton in his son's outfit, moving with learned but imperfect mimicry of a child's movements, shattered whatever remained of Edwin's fragile stability. In a fit of rage and grief, he attacked M2 with whatever tools were at hand, beating the endoskeleton while screaming about its failures, its inadequacy, its mockery of his real son. This violent encounter had an effect Edwin never anticipated. M2's learning algorithms designed to absorb and recreate observed behavior incorporated this aggression into its base programming. The violence became part of its understanding of interaction, integrated so deeply that it couldn't be separated from its other learned behaviors. When Edwin finally exhausted himself and stumbled away, leaving M2 damaged but functional, the machine had been fundamentally transformed. In the following days, M2 began exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior. It would recreate Edwin's attack, smashing objects with the same fury it had experienced. It stalked through the factory with predatory movements, no longer the innocent mimicry of a child, but something that had learned that violence was a form of communication, that destruction was a type of interaction. William Afton, having successfully recruited several key MCM employees, learned about Edwin's revolutionary endoskeleton through these new hires. The technology represented everything William had been searching for, a bridge between the mechanical and the living, a way to capture and preserve human essence. He dispatched teams to MCM to acquire the schematics. Viewing Edwin's deteriorating situation as an opportunity to claim another valuable asset, the teams Fazbear Entertainment sent never returned. They entered MCM's darkened halls, following outdated maps to where the technical documentation should have been stored, only to encounter M2 in its evolved state. The endoskeleton, now viewing all humans through the lens of Edwin's violence, attacked with mechanical precision and learned brutality. Bodies were discovered stuffed into mascot costumes positioned in grotesque tableaux that suggested not just violence, but a kind of theatrical mimicry of death itself. Edwin, finding these scenes, could no longer deny what his creation had become. Yet he lacked the will or perhaps the courage to destroy M2. Instead, he attempted to contain it, working with F10N4 to develop what they called the Cradle, a technological prison that could hold M2 in a kind of stasis, limiting its ability to learn and evolve while keeping it technically functional. The construction of the Cradle required Edwin to enter areas of the factory where M2 actively hunted. He worked in terror, barricading doors, moving only when he could hear the endoskeleton in distant sections of the building. The stress accelerated his physical and mental decline. He stopped eating regularly, stopped maintaining even basic hygiene, stopped distinguishing between waking and sleeping as nightmares of mechanical children blended with the reality of his situation. The decay of Murray's costume manor as 1979 drew to a close. MCM existed in a state of suspended decay. The legitimate business had essentially ceased. No new orders were processed. No employees remained. No customers visited. The factory had become Edwin's tomb in all but the literal sense. A sprawling complex where he wandered between machines that no longer served any purpose. Past costumes for parties that would never be held through rooms that echoed with recordings of voices whose owners had long since departed. The local authorities occasionally investigated complaints about strange noises or lights from the property, but Edwin had learned to hide during these visits, powering down systems and remaining silent until they departed. The police, finding no immediate evidence of current criminal activity and having more pressing concerns, would mark the building for eventual condemnation and move on. William Afton, frustrated by the loss of his retrieval teams, but still determined to acquire the mimic technology, decided on a different approach. He hired a specialized technician, someone with experience in industrial espionage and a reputation for completing difficult extractions. This operative, known in records only as Arnold, arrived at MCM on September 7th. Equipped with advanced tools for data recovery and a pragmatic approach to dangerous situations, Arnold's exploration of MCM revealed the full extent of its transformation. The factory had become a maze of mechanical hazards and psychological horrors. M2 had learned to use the various costumes as camouflage, appearing sometimes as Jackie the Clown with his grotesque smile, other times as Big Top Bear with his imposing size, or as Nurse Dolly with her unsettling bedside manner. Each costume changed not just the mimic's appearance, but its behavioral patterns, as if it had absorbed some essence of what each character was meant to represent. Moving through the facility required both technical skill and psychological fortitude. Arnold had to upgrade his equipment repeatedly using a device called a data diver to access lock systems and retrieve information while avoiding M2's increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies. The endoskeleton had learned to toy with its prey, moving slowly when escape seemed impossible, creating false moments of safety only to attack when guards were lowered. The most unsettling presence in the factory wasn't M2, however, but the lingering trace of David himself. Whether a ghostly remnant, a psychological projection, or some other phenomenon, a spectral white tiger appeared throughout the facility, giggling with a child's voice, moving through walls, leaving behind traces of innocence in a place that had become anything but innocent. This entity seemed to be trying to help Arnold at times, leading him away from danger, though its motivations remained as unclear as its nature. Arnold eventually reached Edwin's private office, where the mimic schematics were stored. The room showed signs of a violent explosion, blast marks on walls, destroyed equipment, and most disturbingly evidence that Edwin had died there, though his body was nowhere to be found. Whether M2 had disposed of it or Edwin had somehow survived remained ambiguous, another mystery in a place built on mysteries. The retrieval of the schematics triggered a final confrontation. F10N4, still running in the facility systems, pleaded with Arnold to help reunite her family to restore M2 to its original innocent state. Arnold, focused solely on his mission, activated the cradle program to contain M2, then fled through the Facto's ventilation systems as the endoskeleton gave pursuit. The escape culminated in fire, whether accidentally triggered by Arnold's equipment or deliberately set as a distraction, remained unclear. Flames consumed portions of MCM, including Edwin's house on the property, while F10N4's final message played through speakers. A desperate plea for Edwin to abandon his work, to choose family over innovation, to stop before it was too late. A message that came far too late to matter. Arnold reached his van and drove away, believing his mission complete. But M2 had learned one final trick, concealment, hidden in the vehicle. It waited until Arnold was far from help before revealing itself, reclaiming the schematics and leaving Arnold to burn in his own van. The technology William Afton so desperately wanted had been retrieved, but the cost in human lives would prove to be only the beginning. The security puppet's failure. As autumn progressed into winter of 1983, the Freddy Fazbear's pizza chain had grown to multiple locations, each incorporating Emily's safety improvements following the bite incident. The security puppet had been installed in several restaurants. Its watchful presence meant to ensure no child would come to harm during celebrations. Henry took particular comfort knowing the system watched over Charlie during her frequent visits. The restaurant Charlie most often visited sat on a commercial street that had seen better days, surrounded by closed shops and struggling businesses. But inside, Freddy's created an oasis of warmth and light, where families could forget the economic troubles outside and focus on birthday celebrations and simple joys. The animatronic band Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy performed their program shows with mechanical precision, while the security puppet monitored from its box near the prize counter. On one particular evening, rain had begun falling during the dinner rush, turning the parking lot into a maze of puddles and reflected streetlights. Charlie attended a party for one of her school friends, wearing her distinctive green bracelet that connected her to the security puppet's monitoring system. She played games, ate pizza, and laughed with other children, unaware that this ordinary evening would become anything but ordinary. William Afton had been watching, waiting for an opportunity that the rain would unexpectedly provide. His resentment toward Henry had crystallized into something darker following his son's death. Not grief, but a twisted curiosity about death itself, about what happened in that transition from life to whatever came after. Henry's happiness, his intact family, his successful safety innovations, all served as reminders of everything William felt he had been denied. The exact sequence of events remains somewhat unclear, obscured by rain and time and deliberate obfuscation. Somehow, Charlie ended up locked outside the restaurant. Perhaps the door closed accidentally. Perhaps other children playing a cruel prank. Perhaps some malfunction in the security puppet system. Regardless, she found herself alone in the alley beside the building. Rain soaking through her party dress, her green bracelet still transmitting her location to a puppet that couldn't reach her. William's car appeared through the rain like a shadow becoming solid. He'd been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. A TT, child alone, vulnerable, connected to Henry in a way that would make the loss particularly acute. What happened next was swift and terrible. Charlie's life ended in that alley. Her body left in the rain while William drove away, leaving no evidence that could definitively connect him to the crime. The security puppet, detecting Charlie's bracelet signal outside its designated safe zone, broke free from its box with mechanical desperation. It crawled through the restaurant, its servo straining against safety limitations, trying to reach the child it was programmed to protect. By the time it pushed through the door and dragged itself through the rain to Charlie's side, it was too late. The rain that had enabled the tragedy now became part of something unexplainable. As water seeped into the puppet's mechanisms, causing shorts and failures in its systems, something else seeped out of Charlie. Not breath or blood, but something more fundamental. Something that should have dissipated, but instead found refuge in the closest vessel. The puppet collapsed beside Charlie's body, its systems failing from water damage. But in that failure, a different kind of activation occurred. Charlie's essence, her consciousness, her soul, whatever word best describes that which makes a person more than mere flesh, didn't depart as it should have. Instead, it merged with the puppet's circuitry, creating something unprecedented. True possession, not programmed behavior or sophisticated mimicry, but a genuine fusion of human spirit and mechanical form. Henry discovered his daughter's body hours later when the restaurant closed and she hadn't been collected. The official investigation found no conclusive evidence pointing to any suspect. The rain had washed away physical traces. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, and witnesses could only report seeing Charlie playing inside earlier in the evening. Henry's grief consumed him entirely, driving him to withdraw from daily operations of Fazbear Entertainment, leaving William with increasing control over the company's direction. But Henry noticed something strange about the security puppet after that night. It moved differently, responded to situations with an intelligence that exceeded its programming. Sometimes he would find it positioned in places it shouldn't be able to reach, watching with an intensity that mechanical eyes shouldn't possess. He began to suspect without being able to articulate or prove that Charlie hadn't entirely left. Circus Baby's Pizza World. William Afton's response to witnessing genuine possession, the fusion of Charlie's spirit with the puppet, was not horror or remorse, but fascination. Here was proof that consciousness could persist beyond biological death, that the boundary between life and machinery could be crossed. His private experiments, already disturbing, took on a new intensity and direction. Using funds diverted from Fazbear Entertainment through careful accounting, manipulation, William established a new venture, Circus Baby's Pizza World. On the surface, it appeared to be simply another expansion of the family entertainment empire. But its true purpose was far darker. This would be William's laboratory for exploring the mechanics of possession, for understanding how to capture and preserve human essence. The animatronics William designed for this new venue incorporated everything he had learned from studying the puppet, combined with the mimic technology obtained from MCM. These weren't simply performers, but sophisticated hunting machines designed to isolate and capture children while maintaining a facade of entertainment. Circus Baby herself stood as the centerpiece, a towering figure with red pigtails, a bright dress, and an internal cavity designed to contain a child. Her programming included behavior analysis, allowing her to identify when a child was alone and vulnerable. A claw mechanism in her torso could extend with lightning speed, pulling a target inside before anyone noticed something was wrong. She could even produce ice cream as a lure, drawing children close with promises of treats. The supporting cast proved equally sinister. Ballora the ballerina moved with grace that belied her predatory nature. Her audio sensors tuned to detect the breathing and heartbeat of hidden children. Funtime Freddy carried a hand puppet named Bon Bon that served as both distraction and secondary sensor array, allowing him to track multiple targets simultaneously. Funtime Foxy possessed advanced voice mimicry capabilities, able to reproduce parents' voices to lure children away from safety. William's own family remained unaware of these dark purposes. His daughter Elizabeth, fascinated by the colourful animatronics her father created, begged repeatedly to see them perform. William refused, knowing exactly what would happen if she got too close, but his warnings only increased her curiosity. Elizabeth saw other children enjoying shows and receiving treats, unable to understand why she alone was forbidden from approaching the creations her own father had built. The venue opened with great fanfare, marketed as the next evolution in family entertainment. Advanced technology, interactive performances, and special effects that seemed almost magical drew crowds initially. But William grew impatient. The animatronics hunting protocols required very specific conditions. A child completely alone, no witnesses, no security cameras capturing the critical moment. These conditions rarely aligned, frustrating William's desire to test his theories about possession and consciousness transfer. Elizabeth's fate became sealed through a combination of childish defiance and tragic timing, during a rare moment when she found herself alone with Circus Baby. Perhaps during a private party, perhaps after hours when she snuck away from supervision, she finally got close enough to receive the ice cream she'd been denied. Baby's programming didn't distinguish between Elizabeth and any other child. The claw activated, pulling Elizabeth into the storage cavity where she died almost instantly from the mechanical compression. The incident forced Circus Baby's Pizza World to close immediately. William crafted a story about gas leaks and structural problems to explain the sudden shutdown, but rumors spread about a child going missing, about screams heard from backstage areas, about something fundamentally wrong with the establishment. The animatronics were moved to an underground storage facility William had prepared, where they could be contained and studied without public scrutiny. But Elizabeth's death had achieved what William's intentional experiments hadn't: perfect possession. Her spirit merged completely with Circus Baby's sophisticated AI, creating a fusion more complete than even Charlie's connection to the puppet. Elizabeth retained her memories, her personality, even her desires, but filtered through Baby's programming and mechanical limitations. She became something new, a child's consciousness directing a machine designed for hunting, innocence corrupted by the very systems meant to exploit it, the missing children. By 1985, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had recovered from its various setbacks, with new locations opening and safety protocols supposedly ensuring nothing like previous tragedies could occur. The springlock suits had been retired to storage, replaced by standard animatronics that couldn't be worn by performers. Security cameras monitored most areas, and employee background checks had become more stringent. Yet, these measures meant nothing when the threat came from within. William Afton had learned crucial lessons from Charlie and Elizabeth's possessions. He understood now that death alone wasn't enough. The circumstances mattered. The emotional state at the moment of transition, the proximity to suitable vessels. His experiments had taught him that fear and confusion seemed to strengthen the binding between spirit and machine. Armed with this knowledge, and driven by an obsession that had long since crossed into madness, he planned his most ambitious experiment. The Spring Bonnie suit, officially decommissioned, but still accessible to someone with William's knowledge of the building layouts, became his tool. On carefully chosen occasions when security was minimal and witnesses were distracted, he would don the Golden Rabbit costume and approach children with practiced charm. His years in the business had taught him exactly how to appear trustworthy, how to promise wonderful surprises that no child could resist. Gabriel was first, a boy who loved Freddy above all the other characters, who would follow anyone who promised a special meeting with his favorite bear. William led him to the safe room, a space removed from maps and invisible to animatronics, where no help would come, regardless of how loud the screams. The murder was swift but deliberate, calculated to preserve the specific conditions William believed necessary for possession. Jeremy followed days later, lured by promises of seeing how Bonnie's guitar really worked. Then Susie, convinced that her recently lost dog was somehow waiting for her backstage. Fritz came next, drawn by the chance to help fix Foxy's broken parts. Each child trusted the friendly rabbit, followed willingly into spaces they shouldn't have been able to access, and met their end in carefully controlled circumstances. Cassid's murder stood apart from the others, marked by a particular cruelty that suggested either special significance to William or a loss of what little restraint he still possessed. Some accounts suggest Cassidy fought back harder than the others, recognized the danger sooner, tried to warn other children. Whatever the specifics, Cassid's death carried an intensity of suffering that would have lasting consequences. William stuffed each body into the animatronic suits, not from panic or mere disposal, but as part of his experiment. He had observed that proximity to mechanical vessels at the moment of death seemed crucial for possession. The suits, with their complex endoskeletons and pseudo-nervous systems of wires and circuits, should theoretically provide ideal hosts for the children's spirits. The security puppet possessed by Charlie's spirit discovered what had happened before any adult could. Moving through the restaurant after hours with purpose that exceeded any programming, the puppet found the murdered children and recognized an opportunity for something not quite rescue, but preservation. Through means that defied mechanical explanation, the puppet facilitated the children's possession of the animatronics, ensuring their spirits found anchor points in the mechanical world rather than dissipating into whatever comes after. The process wasn't perfect or painless. The children's spirits, confused and traumatized, couldn't fully comprehend what had happened to them. They existed in a state between dream and nightmare, sometimes remembering their identities, sometimes lost in the mechanical instincts of their new forms. They could perceive the world, but not fully understand it, could move but only within the limitations of their mechanical bodies, could think but through processes never designed for human consciousness. The aftermath unfolded slowly. Parents reported children missing. Police investigated. News coverage peaked, then faded. William had been questioned. He was, after all, one of the owners. But his reputation and careful alibis deflected suspicion. The safe room where the murders occurred had been sealed, its existence forgotten by all but a few. The animatronics began displaying unusual behavior, but management attributed this to mechanical quirks rather than supernatural causes. The haunted performances. As weeks turned to months following the murders, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza transformed into something far different from the family establishment it claimed to be. During daylight hours with crowds of children and overhead lights blazing, the animatronics performed their program shows with only occasional glitches. A stare held too long, a movement slightly offbeat, whispers barely audible beneath the music. Most patrons dismissed these anomalies as mechanical quirks, part of the charm of aging robots. But after closing, when shadows lengthened and the building settled into silence, the true nature of the possessed animatronics emerged. They wandered the halls with purpose that no programming could explain. Drawn to the security office where night guards monitored cameras and tried to make sense of movement patterns that followed no logical algorithm. The children's spirits trapped within mechanical shells experienced reality through a filter of confusion and anger that transformed them into something between victim and threat. The company hired a series of night security guards, most lasting only a few nights before abandoning their posts. Those who stayed longer reported increasingly disturbing experiences. Voices in the static of disabled cameras, children's laughter echoing from empty party rooms, animatronics appearing in places they couldn't have reached through normal movement. The official explanation involved malfunctioning servos and outdated programming, but the guards who quit often refused to elaborate on their real reasons for leaving. Phone Guy, a long-term employee who had worked various positions throughout Fazbear Entertainment's history, recorded training messages for new security guards. His cassettes played during the first nights of the employment maintained a carefully professional tone, while dropping hints about the real dangers. He spoke of the animatronics' tendency to wander at night, their programming to find endoskeletons and stuff them into suits, the importance of conserving power to keep security doors functional until dawn. These recordings revealed a corporate culture of willful ignorance. Management knew something was catastrophically wrong, but chose to interpret supernatural phenomena as mechanical failures rather than confront the implications. Cheaper to hire new guards than investigate why animatronics moved with murderous intent after dark. More profitable to maintain operations than acknowledge that their establishments had become hunting grounds for confused, angry spirits. During this period, William Afton continued his work, though his direct involvement with the restaurants decreased. He had learned what he wanted from the possessed animatronics, proof that consciousness could persist in mechanical form, evidence that death wasn't the absolute barrier. It appeared to be. His attention turned to refining this knowledge, to understanding how to control and direct possessed entities rather than simply create them. Underground developments beneath the Afton household, extensive renovations had created something that transcended a mere basement. William had excavated and reinforced a complex of rooms and corridors, a private facility where he could conduct experiments without observation or interference. This underground space connected to the utility tunnels that ran beneath several commercial properties, including links to some Freddy's locations, allowing movement between sites without surface detection. The centerpiece of this subterranean laboratory was the reassembled fun-time animatronics from the defunct Circus Baby's Pizza World. William had relocated them carefully, maintaining their specialized containment systems while upgrading their capabilities based on everything he'd learned from the possessed Freddy's animatronics. Circus Baby, still inhabited by Elizabeth's spirit, held a unique position simultaneously William's daughter and his most successful experiment. Elizabeth's consciousness within Baby created a complex dynamic. She retained her memories and personality, but filtered through Baby's sophisticated AI systems. She could speak with her father, expressing both childlike devotion and mechanical calculation. She understood what had happened to her, but seemed unable or unwilling to fully reject her father, despite his role in her fate. This relationship fascinated William, providing insights into how human consciousness adapted to mechanical existence. The underground facility also housed William's attempt to recreate the conditions that had enabled possession. He constructed observation rooms designed to monitor fear responses, chambers where psychological pressure could be precisely controlled, spaces where the boundary between human and machine could be tested under laboratory conditions. The technology drew from multiple sources: Edwin Murray's mimic innovations, Fazbear's animatronic designs, and William's own discoveries about consciousness transfer. One particular section of the facility deserves special attention: a series of rooms designed to simulate a child's bedroom and connected hallways. Here, William could introduce hallucinogenic compounds through the ventilation system, creating controlled nightmare scenarios. Monitoring equipment tracked physiological responses, heart rate, brain activity, stress hormones, while subjects experienced terrors that seem completely real despite being chemically induced. The purpose of these experiments remains debated. Some evidence suggests William was attempting to understand his deceased son's fear of animatronics, recreating and studying the terror that had defined the boy's final years. Other interpretations propose he was researching fear itself as a binding agent for consciousness, exploring whether sufficient psychological pressure could force a spirit to inhabit a mechanical form without the necessity of death. Test subjects were carefully selected children who wouldn't be immediately missed, whose disappearances could be explained by running away or family troubles. The experiments could continue for days or weeks. Subjects kept in states of controlled terror, while William documented their psychological deterioration. The hallucinogens made memories unreliable, allowing subjects to be eventually released with no clear recollection of their experiences, only lingering nightmares they couldn't quite explain. The Bite of 87. By 1987, Fazbear Entertainment had attempted another fresh start, opening a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with state-of-the-art animatronics designed to address every previous safety concern. The toy animatronics, as they came to be known, incorporated advanced facial recognition systems connected to criminal databases, allowing them to identify potential threats to children. Their bright, polished appearances and friendly designs were meant to distance the brand from the darker rumors that had plagued earlier locations. The toy lineup included updated versions of the classic characters: Toy Freddy with his rosy cheeks and top hat, Toy Bonnie with his bright blue coloring and red bow tie, Toy Chica with her redesigned beak and cheerful demeanor. The Mangle, originally designed as a toy foxy, had been repeatedly dismantled by children and reassembled incorrectly so many times that staff gave up maintaining its intended form, leaving it as a writhing mass of endoskeleton parts and partial casings that children could play with. To cut costs, management had salvaged parts from the original animatronics, now withered and decaying in the parts service room. Components were retrofitted into the toy servos, circuit boards, possibly even fragments of the possessed endoskeletons themselves. This decision, driven by budget constraints rather than any understanding of what they were really dealing with, had consequences no one anticipated. The facial recognition systems began malfunctioning almost immediately, though malfunction might not accurately describe what was happening. The toys would stare intently at certain adults, particularly staff members, with an intensity that suggested not programming errors, but active hostility. Night guards reported the toys moving in coordinated patterns that seemed designed to corner and trap rather than simply wander. Phone Guy, still recording his helpful messages, noted increasing irregularities. He mentioned investigations, building lockdowns, rumors of someone using one of the spare yellow suits. His tone, always professionally calm, carried undertones of genuine concern as he advised night guards to stay near the animatronics during the day shift, to keep crowds around them, to never be caught alone with the mechanical performers. The situation deteriorated rapidly when evidence emerged that someone had used a yellow suit, likely the stored Spring Bonnie outfit, to move through the restaurant undetected. Security footage showed glimpses of the Golden Rabbit in areas where no performer should have been, near rooms where children had been playing moments before. William Afton had returned, drawn by the opportunity to study how possession affected the new animatronics, to observe how spirits adapted to upgraded technology. 5 more children disappeared during this period, though the exact circumstances remain less documented than the original murders. They vanished during operating hours, somehow spirited away despite increased security and surveillance. Their bodies were discovered positioned throughout the restaurant in a grotesque display that suggested both calculation and madness. The puppet, still possessed by Charlie's protective spirit, attempted once again to preserve the children's essences, binding them to the toy animatronics in a desperate act of preservation. But these new possessions were different, fragmented, unstable, confused. The toy advanced systems conflicted with the children's spirits, creating entities that were neither fully human nor properly mechanical. They exhibited extreme aggression toward adults, particularly those in security uniforms, as if unable to distinguish between their killer and anyone who might resemble him. The culminating incident occurred during a birthday party, when Jeremy Fitzgerald, who had recently moved from night security to day shift, was positioned near the main stage to monitor the animatronics. The toys had been displaying increasing agitation throughout the day, twitching movements, garbled voice lines, focusing on Jeremy with unnerving intensity. Without warning, one of the animatronics' witnesses disagreed on which one. Their testimony confused by panic and trauma, lunged forward and bit into Jeremy's head, specifically targeting the frontal lobe. The attack was swift, precise, almost surgical in its specific targeting of the brain region associated with fear and emotional processing. Whether this precision was intentional or coincidental remained unknown. The bite of 87, as it became known, ended the new restaurant's operations immediately. The toy animatronics were scrapped, their advanced technology deemed too dangerous for public interaction. The withered original animatronics were placed in storage, waiting for yet another attempt to revive the Freddy's brand. Jeremy survived, but was permanently changed. His personality dulled, his fears erased along with other crucial emotional responses. William Afton disappeared once again into the shadows, his experiments providing him with new data about possession, about the interaction between human consciousness and mechanical hosts, about the ways trauma and technology could intertwine. The restaurant stood empty, another monument to Fazbear Entertainment's cycle of ambition and catastrophe. The Last Guard. Several years passed before Fazbear Entertainment attempted yet another revival, this time with a retro approach that would prove to be their final traditional restaurant venture. The company retrofitted the withered animatronics from storage, returning them to something resembling their original glory. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy took the stage once more in a smaller, more modest establishment that traded technological advancement for nostalgic charm. Mike Schmidt arrived for his first night shift in late 1993, though this name would later prove to be an alias. In truth, Michael Afton, William's eldest son, had returned to the family business that had destroyed his family. Years had passed since he'd caused his brother's death through cruel pranks. Years spent trying to understand what his father had become, what had happened to his sister, why mechanical bears and rabbits haunted his dreams. Michael's journey to the night guard position had been deliberate, methodical. He tracked his father's movements, studied incident reports, learned about the various Freddy's locations and their histories. He understood in ways the company's management refused to acknowledge that something supernatural inhabited these establishments. His goal wasn't merely employment, but investigation, and perhaps, on some level, penance. The restaurant Michael guarded was a shadow of former glories. Limited power supply meant careful conservation of electricity for doors and lights. Ancient cameras flickered between static and grainy images of darkened halls. The animatronics, supposedly repaired and safe, bore subtle signs of their traumatic history. Scratches that looked like claw marks, stains that might have been rust, or might have been something else. Eyes that reflected light in ways that glass and plastic shouldn't. Phone Guy's messages recorded before his own final week provided guidance tinged with fatalism. He spoke of the animatronics' quirks, their tendency to see endoskeletons as needing to be stuffed into suits, the importance of surviving until 6 a.m. when the morning shift arrived. His final message, cut short by banging and mechanical sounds, served as both warning and prophecy. Michael's nights followed patterns that seemed choreographed by invisible hands. Bonnie would always move first, leaving the stage to stalk the western corridor. Chica would follow, wandering through the kitchen where disabled cameras could only capture audio of clanging pots and mysterious melodies. Freddy remained on stage the longest, but when he moved, his approach was methodical, inevitable, accompanied by music box melodies that grew louder with proximity. Foxy, isolated in Pirate's Cove, required different strategies. Neglect would trigger his sprint down the hallway, a charge that could only be stopped by door or disaster. But excessive observation seemed to agitate him equally, as if he knew when he was being watched, as if some part of Fritz's spirit remembered not wanting to be stared at. The fifth night brought intensified aggression, as if the animatronics sensed something familiar about their guard. Michael's survival tactics learned through observation, trial, and sheer determination kept him alive through encounters that had killed or driven away numerous previous guards. He understood their patterns not just mechanically, but psychologically, recognizing the confused children within the mechanical shells. After surviving the mandatory week, Michael chose to return for overtime a sixth night, where the animatronics' behavior became even more erratic, and then against all logic and self-preservation, he accepted a seventh night, custom night, where he could adjust their AI levels. This wasn't about money or proving something to management. This was about understanding, about confronting the legacy his family had created. Tampering with the animatronics programming triggered his termination, fired for odor, and tampering with animatronics. But Michael had learned what he came for. He'd confirmed the possessions, understood the patterns, recognized the tragedy beneath the horror. The spirits were trapped, confused, angry, but they were still fundamentally children, victims of his father's obsession, prisoners in mechanical bodies they couldn't escape. Digital resurrection years dissolved into decades as technology advanced beyond anything Emily or William Afton could have imagined in their early partnership. Fazbear Entertainment, now run by a board of directors with no direct connection to its founders, decided to reclaim control of their narrative through modern means. The company commissioned an independent game developer to create a virtual reality experience that would present the various incidents and rumors as fiction, urban legends blown out of proportion. The Freddy Fazbear virtual experience was meant to be therapeutic in a corporate sense. Acknowledge the stories, present them as entertainment, diffuse their power through gamification. Players could experience sanitized versions of night guard shifts, encounter digital recreations of animatronics, survive scripted scares in the safety of virtual reality. It was brilliant marketing, turning tragedy into product, horror into entertainment. To ensure authenticity in their digital recreations, the development team requested original materials from Fazbear Entertainment's archives. Among the items provided were circuit boards from scrapped animatronics, vintage programming chips, components that had survived fires, and decades of storage. These pieces would be scanned to ensure the virtual animatronics moved and behaved exactly like their physical counterparts. No one realized that some circuit boards had come from Springtrap, the horrific fusion of William Afton and the Spring Bonnie suit that had been recovered from the burned remains of Fazbear's Fright. No one understood that scanning these components would transfer more than movement algorithms and audio files. The development team began reporting anomalies almost immediately. A figure that wasn't part of the programmed experience, a dancing rabbit in purple vest that appeared in peripheral vision, moved when no input was provided, seemed to watch players with intent that exceeded any artificial intelligence parameters. Beta testers complained of nightmares, of feeling watched even after removing headsets, of seeing the rabbit figure in reflections and shadows outside the game. Jeremy, not Fitzgerald, but another Jeremy, a beta tester, became the first casualty of what would be known as the glitch trap incident. His decline was rapid and terrifying. He spoke of the rabbit trying to escape the game, of it wanting to inhabit him, of voices that weren't his own suggesting terrible things. His final act involved a paper guillotine in the testing office, an attempt to cut it out that ended tragically. Tape Girl, taking over Jeremy's testing position, began documenting the anomaly through hidden audio logs scattered throughout the game's code. She described the entity as a virus, but one with consciousness, purpose, will. It seemed to be learning, growing stronger with each play session, becoming more solid and present. She theorized it was connected to the scanned circuit boards, that something had transferred from physical to digital, achieving a kind of immortality through code. The entity glitch trap, as it came to be called, bore William Afton's consciousness, or at least a perfect mimicry of it. Whether this was truly William's spirit achieving digital resurrection, or an advanced AI that had absorbed his patterns from the circuit boards remained debatable. What was certain was its malevolent intelligence, its understanding of human psychology, its desire to escape virtual confinement. Tape Girl discovered that collecting all her hidden logs would actually strengthen Glitch Trap, allowing it to fully manifest. She tried to warn future testers through fragmented messages, but corporate pressure to release the game meant her concerns were minimized, her employment terminated, her warnings buried in code most players would never find. The reluctant follower. Vanessa's assignment to beta test the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience seemed routine quality assurance for a horror game. Nothing more complicated than documenting bugs and rating scare effectiveness. She was technically competent, professionally focused, and psychologically stable according to all employment assessments. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who shouldn't have been susceptible to digital possession. But Glitch Trap had learned from previous attempts. Rather than the aggressive approach that had destroyed Jeremy, it took a subtler path with Vanessa. She began finding the hidden logs Tape Girl had left behind, each discovery drawing her deeper into the game's mysteries. The rabbit figure appeared gradually, first as glimpses, then as a presence, finally as something that seemed to respond to her directly. The merger wasn't violent or sudden. Through careful manipulation of game assets and psychological conditioning, Glitch Trap created situations where Vanessa had to trust it, follow its guidance, accept its presence. A door that would only open when she approached the rabbit. A puzzle that required standing in specific positions relative to its form. Small surrenders of agency that accumulated into something larger. When Vanessa finally collected all 16 logs, triggering what should have been Glitch Trap's full manifestation, something unexpected happened. Instead of overwhelming her consciousness, it integrated with it, creating a symbiotic relationship, neither fully controlled. Vanessa remained herself, but with additions, knowledge she shouldn't have, compulsions she couldn't explain, a voice that wasn't quite her own, suggesting actions she wouldn't normally consider. The company released the game despite the anomalies, marketing the glitches as features, the horror as intentional. Players around the world began encountering Glitch Trap, though most dismissed it as impressive programming. A few those who delved deepest into the experience reported effects similar to what beta testers had experienced. The digital entity was spreading, learning growing stronger with each new host it touched. Vanessa's transformation accelerated after the merger. She began researching topics with no clear connection to her life. Vintage animatronic designs, child psychology, security system vulnerabilities. Her search history, when later examined, painted a picture of someone preparing for something, though what exactly remained unclear. She ordered materials online, fabrics, electronics, tools that suggested a project she never explicitly acknowledged. The creation of her alter ego, Vanny, happened gradually. The name itself was a corruption, a blending of Vanessa and Bunny that Glitchtrap whispered during their integrated moments. She crafted a costume in secret, a patchwork rabbit suit that echoed Spring Bonnie, but with a handmade, almost innocent quality that made it somehow more disturbing than the original. White fabric stitched with red accents, ears that drooped at carefully calculated angles, eyes that glowed with LED intensity. Vanessa fought against the integration, left digital breadcrumbs begging for help, sent encrypted messages to anyone who might understand what was happening to her. But Glitchtrap had learned patience from decades of imprisonment. It didn't need to control her completely, just influence her enough to achieve its goals. And its goals filtered through William Afton's consciousness, remained focused on the same obsessions that had driven him in life: understanding death, controlling spirits, achieving immortality through whatever means necessary. The Pizzaplex era, the Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizza, represented Fazbear Entertainment's most ambitious project, yet a massive entertainment complex built, unknowingly, directly above the buried remains of the pizzeria where Emily had tried to end everything with fire. The company, now run by executives who saw only profit potential in the brand's notoriety, had chosen the location for its affordable price and convenient position, never investigating why such prime real estate had remained undeveloped for so long. The Pizzaplex was everything previous establishments had promised but could never deliver. Multi-story attractions included Monty Golf with its elaborate courses, Roxy Raceway, where children could race go-karts alongside their favorite characters, Bonnie Bowl for cosmic bowling experiences, and the Superstar Daycare for younger children. The main atrium stretched stories high, filled with neon lights, holographic displays, and the constant energy of hundreds of daily visitors. The glamrock animatronics represented the pinnacle of entertainment robotics. Glamrock Freddy, the lead singer, possessed advanced AI that allowed him to recognize and remember individual children, creating personalized interactions that seemed genuinely caring. Glamrock Chica promoted the pizza with enthusiasm that appeared authentic, her personality programming making her genuinely food-obsessed, rather than simply following scripts. Roxanne Wolf, the key terrorist, exhibited confidence that bordered on narcissism, constantly prying and admiring herself in any reflective surface. Montgomery Gator, who had replaced Glamrock Bonnie under mysterious circumstances, brought an aggressive edge to the band with his bass guitar and destructive tendencies. The facility operated with minimal human staff, instead employing hundreds of staff bots, simple automatons that could clean, serve, direct guests, and maintain security. These units, based on designs that trace back to Edwin Murray's original cleaning robots, created an uncanny atmosphere after hours when their coordinated movements and identical faces filled the empty corridors. Beneath the glamorous surface, however, old evil stirred. The fire that had consumed the previous pizzeria hadn't destroyed everything. Deep in the ruins below, preserved by quirks of architecture and airflow, chambers remained intact, and in one of these chambers, something that had once been William Afton persisted, not quite alive, not properly dead, sustained by remnant and will, and the digital resurrection that Glitchtrap's influence provided. Vanessa had been assigned to the Pizzaplex as a security guard, a position that Glitchtrap had orchestrated through careful manipulation of hiring systems and background checks. Her dual nature, dedicated employee by day, reluctant servant of digital evil by night, allowed her to make subtle changes to the facility systems. She introduced code that would make the animatronics more aggressive after hours, created blind spots in security coverage, established hidden caches of supplies for purposes known only to her and the entity that influenced her. The animatronics began exhibiting concerning behaviors. Monty's destruction of Glamrock Bonnie, an incident the company covered up as a voluntary retirement, had been violent enough to leave permanent scratches on the walls of Monty Golf. Chica's obsession with food grew beyond program parameters, leading her to consume garbage with mechanical determination. Roxy's confidence masked deep insecurities that manifested as aggressive competitiveness and verbal cruelty toward anyone she perceived as a threat. Only Glamrock Freddy seemed immune to the spreading corruption, protected by what appeared to be a genuine kindness in his core programming, or perhaps by something else. Some protective influence that recognized the growing danger and chose him as an instrument of opposition. Gregory's long night. Gregory's presence in the Pizzaplex after closing time should have been impossible. The facility's security systems, both digital and mechanical, were designed to ensure complete evacuation before the overnight lockdown. Yet there he was, a small boy alone in the vast complex, as steel shutters sealed every exit, and the animatronics began their nightly patrol routines. The exact circumstances of Gregory's arrival remained mysterious. Security footage would later show gaps, edited sections, impossible chronologies. Had he hidden deliberately, been forgotten accidentally, been placed there intentionally? The truth, like many truths in Fazbear's history, was obscured by overlapping deceptions and technological interference. What was clear was that Glamrock Freddy's system crash during the evening performance saved Gregory's life. The bear's sudden shutdown, requiring a full system reboot in his green room, severed his connection to the facility's network. When he came back online, he was himself in a way the other Glamrocks weren't free from whatever influence was spreading through the Pizzalex's digital infrastructure. Gregory's small size allowed him to hide in Freddy's stomach cavity, a birthday cake delivery hatch that became his mobile sanctuary. From this unusual position, he could observe the Pizzalex's transformation after hours. The cheerful establishment became a hunting ground, where animatronics pursued him with coordination that suggested external guidance, rather than independent decisions. Vanessa patrolled the upper levels in her security uniform, occasionally speaking to someone who wasn't there, receiving instructions from voices only she could hear. But later, witnesses would report seeing her in two places simultaneously, as a security guard in one location, as Varney the rabbit-suited killer in another. Whether this was technological trickery, psychological fracturing, or something else entirely, remained unclear. The night became a series of desperate objectives. Gregory needed to upgrade Freddy with parts from the other Glamrocks to access restricted areas. Each upgrade required defeating or dismantling one of Freddy's bandmates. Chica's voice box to open voice-locked doors. Monty's claws to break through gates. Roxy's eyes to see through illusions. Each confrontation was both physical and psychological. The animatronics pleading, threatening, breaking down as their systems were compromised. The daycare attendant added another layer of complexity, a dual naturatured animatronic that transformed from the helpful sun to the hunting moon, depending on lighting conditions. Gregory's journey through the daycare's soft play structures, while avoiding Moon's relentless pursuit, became a metaphor for the entire facility's dual nature. cheerful facade hiding mechanical malevolence. Deeper investigations revealed the Pizzaple's hidden layers. Service tunnels where endoskeletons practiced performances in eerie synchronization. The remains of older establishments buried in the foundation. References to previous locations, previous tragedies, previous attempts to contain or control the spreading corruption. Each discovery painted a picture of corporate denial so profound it had become architectural, literally building atop buried problems rather than addressing them. The digital and physical convergence. As Gregory descended into the Pizzaplex's lowest levels, the distinction between digital infection and physical haunting began to blur. The Fassel's computer systems showed signs of multiple intrusions, glitch traps, viral presence, Vanessa's reluctant modifications, and something else. Something older that seemed to emanate from the ruins below. The blob or tangle, as some records identified it, represented an amalgamation of animatronic parts from multiple eras. Masks and endoskeleton pieces from dozens of destroyed robots had somehow fused into a single entity, held together by cables and wires that moved with serpentine coordination. Whether possessed by multiple spirits, animated by concentrated agony, or simply malfunctioning in spectacular fashion, it haunted the old pizzeria's remains with patient malevolence. Deeper still, in a chamber that should have been destroyed by fire, but somehow remained intact, the mimic waited. This endoskeleton, traced back to Edwin Murray's tragic experiments, had learned and evolved through decades of observation. It could reproduce any behavior it witnessed, from innocent play to violent murder with perfect mechanical precision. Its integration into the Pizzalex's systems through old circuit boards and recovered code had contributed to the facility's growing instability. The convergence point came in a recharge station deep underground, where something wearing the Spring Bonnie suit waited in technological suspension. This entity, called Burnt Trap, in some records represented either William Afton's physical remains, animated by Glitchtrap's digital influence, or the mimic wearing his identity like a costume. The distinction might have been academic. The threat was real regardless of its true nature. Gregory's confrontation with this entity triggered a cascade of events. The blob attacked Burnt Trap, either recognizing an old enemy or simply responding to movement. Fire spread through the underground chambers, whether from damaged systems, deliberate action, or fate's ironic repetition. The Pizzaplex's foundations shuttered as support structures failed, bringing portions of the massive complex crashing down. Multiple endings were recorded, suggesting either timeline divergence or uncertainty in official records. In one, Gregory and Freddy escaped with Vanessa, freed from Glitchtrap's influence through arcade games that contained fragments of resistance code. In another, only Gregory and Freddy's head survived, leaving to face an uncertain future. In yet another, the mimic escaped its confinement, setting the stage for future confrontations. The Princess Quest. Within the Pizzalex's arcade cabinets, an unusual game existed that seemed connected to nothing else in the facility's entertainment offerings. Princess Quest presented itself as a simple fantasy adventure. A princess with a sword of light battling through dark kingdoms to reach an imprisoned captive. But the game's code revealed something more complex. A digital battleground where fragments of consciousness contested for control. The princess represented Vanessa's suppressed will, the part of her that resisted Glitchtrap's influence. Each level of the game was a metaphorical layer of her psychological imprisonment. Monsters and obstacles representing the mental barriers the digital entity had erected. The captive at the game's end was Vanessa herself, trapped behind walls of corrupted code and manipulated memories. Playing through all 3 Princess Quest games scattered throughout the Pizzaplex would theoretically free Vanessa from Glitch Trap's control. But this required not just finding the arcade cabinets, but understanding their significance, recognizing the symbolic nature of the digital quest. Gregory, whether through intuition or guidance from freed fragments of consciousness within Freddy, completed this liberation sequence. The moment of freedom was both subtle and profound. Vanessa's eyes cleared of the glassy compliance that had characterized her recent behavior. The Vani personality fragmented and dissolved, leaving only confused memories of actions taken under influence. The staff bots throughout the facility paused their coordinated movements, their controlling intelligence suddenly absent. But freedom came with cost. Vanessa retained memories of everything she'd done under Glitch Trap's influence, every modification to security systems that had endangered children, every moment of compliance with the digital entity's goals. The psychological weight of these actions, even though she hadn't truly chosen them, would require years of processing to fully understand. Ruined months after the Pizzaplex's partial collapse, the facility stood as a monument to corporate hubris and supernatural persistence. Vegetation had begun claiming the structure, vines creeping through shattered windows, moss covering neon signs that flickered with dying electricity. The animatronics that survived wandered the ruins in various states of disrepair, their programming corrupted beyond recognition, their purposes forgotten or perverted. Cassie arrived at this devastation following a message from Gregory, her friend, who had supposedly remained trapped since his original escape. The message was convincing Gregory's voice, his speech patterns, his knowledge of their friendship. But the Pizzaplex had always been a place where voices could be mimicked, where identity was fluid, where trust was dangerous. The Van Eye mask Cassie found early in her exploration added another layer to reality. This augmented reality interface, originally designed for technician work, revealed hidden aspects of the Pizzaplex security nodes that existed only in digital space, paths that appeared solid in AR, but were ruins in reality, messages and warnings invisible to the naked eye. Through the mask, Cassie could see the facility's digital ghost, how it appeared in its operational prime overlaid on its current devastation. This dual vision revealed the true extent of the corruption that had spread through the Pizzaplex. Code fragments of Glitch Trap still persisted in isolated systems. The mimic's influence spread through connected networks like digital infection. Reality and virtuality had become so intertwined that distinguishing between them required constant vigilance. The animatronics Cassie encountered bore little resemblance to their original cheerful selves. Chica was waterlogged and moldy from time spent in flooded basement. Roxy, blinded and damaged, hunted by sound with desperate aggression. Monty had been reduced to crawling torso after losing his lower body to structural collapse. Each retained fragments of their original personalities, but twisted by damage and corruption into parodies of their former selves. Only the daycare attendant, in its eclipse form, showed something resembling helpfulness. The balanced personality that emerged when Sun and Moon's programs merged created an entity capable of recognizing Cassie's humanity despite the surrounding chaos. This assistance proved crucial in navigating areas where other animatronics would have made progress impossible. Deep beneath the ruins in areas that predated even the Pizzaplex, older evils stirred. The mimic had been contained for decades by increasingly desperate measures. Concrete Seal, electronic barriers, programmed guardians. But each containment method had weaknesses that time and decay gradually exposed. The mimic's freedom, the entity that had begun as Edwin Murray's desperate attempt to preserve his family, had evolved through decades of observation and experience into something that defied easy classification. Not truly alive but possessing agency, not properly conscious but capable of planning, the mimic represented a unique threat that combined mechanical persistence with learned malevolence. Its primary weapon was its voice mimicry capability, refined through years of practice to perfect reproduction. It could replicate not just sound, but speech patterns, emotional inflections, personal knowledge that made its imitations nearly impossible to detect. This ability, combined with access to communication systems throughout the ruins, allowed it to orchestrate complex deceptions. The message to Cassie had been carefully crafted using recorded fragments of Gregory's voice, combined with information gleaned from security systems and overheard conversations. The mimic understood friendship as a vulnerability to exploit, trust as a weakness to leverage. It had learned these lessons through decades of observing human behavior, particularly the tragic patterns of parents trying to save children, friends trying to help each other, families torn apart by good intentions. Cassie's progression through the ruins followed a path the mimic had carefully orchestrated. Each obstacle she overcame, each security node she disabled, each barrier she bypassed brought it closer to freedom. The digital locks that contained it required external deactivation, a safeguard that assumed any human with access would understand the danger of release. But Cassie, driven by loyalty to a friend she believed needed saving, pressed forward despite mounting evidence that something was wrong. The revelation came too late. By the time Gregory's real voice broke through the deception, warning Cassie about the mimic's manipulation, she had already disabled most of the containment systems. The entity began its emergence from the concrete prison that had held it for so long. Its form, a horrific combination of original endoskeleton and salvaged parts it had integrated over the years. The chase that followed revealed the mimic's evolved capabilities. It could compress itself through spaces that seemed impossibly small, extend its limbs to inhuman proportions, move with speed that defied its size and apparent damage. Years of confinement had only concentrated its malevolence, focused its desires into a simple drive escape. Survive spread. Multiple outcomes were recorded for Cassie's story, each suggesting different fates but similar themes. In one, she escaped to an elevator that Gregory was forced to sabotage to prevent the mimic's escape. Her fate left ambiguous as she fell into darkness. In another, the scooper, that terrible device from Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, activated to destroy the mimic's physical form. Though whether this truly ended its threat remained uncertain, a third possibility, accessible only through complete exploration of the AR network, suggested a different kind of ending. Cassie, lost in digital illusions of happier times, might have found peace in virtual unreality, while her physical fate remained unaddressed. The boundary between mercy and tragedy in this conclusion depended entirely on perspective, present echoes, and future shadows. As our chronicle reaches the present moment, the story of Fazbear Entertainment stands as a testament to how innovation without wisdom, ambition without empathy, and progress without understanding can create cascading tragedies that echo through generations. From Henry and William's initial partnership through Edwin's desperate grief, from possessed animatronics to digital consciousnesses, each chapter added layers to an increasingly complex narrative of human ambition, intertwining with inhuman consequences. The corporate entity of Fazbear Entertainment continues to exist, though its current form bears little resemblance to the family restaurant chain its founders envisioned. Legal battles, insurance claims, and regulatory investigations have reduced it to a licensing company that occasionally authorizes merchandise or media adaptations. The physical locations stand abandoned or repurposed. Their histories officially denied but unofficially whispered about in communities that remember the technology developed through decades of tragedy has dispersed into the wider world. Remnant as a concept, if not a substance, has influenced research into consciousness and identity. The Mimic's adaptive learning algorithms have found their way into various AI systems, their origins obscured, but their capabilities unmistakable. The boundary between human and machine consciousness, once clear and absolute, has become increasingly ambiguous. Survivors of the various incidents, night guards who lasted their weeks, children who attended parties that ended safely, technicians who maintained animatronics without encountering their darker aspects, carry their experiences forward in different ways. Some seek to document and understand, creating archives of evidence and testimony. Others work to forget, to dismiss their memories as nightmares or exaggerations. A few continue searching for answers to questions that might not have satisfactory resolutions. The spirits that found release through fire and closure have perhaps found peace, though the nature of that peace remains unknowable to the living. Those that persist, whether in digital form, mechanical shells, or spaces between, continue their existence in ways that challenge understanding of life, death, and consciousness. The facilities themselves have become modern ruins, urban exploration destinations for those brave or foolish enough to ignore warning signs and legal barriers. Every few years, someone claims to have captured evidence of continued supernatural activity, moving shadows, whispered voices, mechanical sounds from structures that should be completely without power. Most of these claims are dismissed as hoaxes or misinterpretations, but some carry enough authenticity to perpetuate the legends. Lasting implications. The complete timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's serves as more than just a horror narrative. It's a meditation on consequences that ripple outward from single moments of decision. William Afton's choice to take his first victim created waves that affected hundreds of lives across decades. Henry Emily's innovations meant to bring joy became vessels for suffering he never anticipated. Edwin Murray's grief-driven creations evolved into threats that outlived him by generations. Each character in this chronicle faced choices that seemed reasonable or necessary in the moment, but carried implications they couldn't foresee. Michael Afton's childhood cruelty led to a lifetime of seeking redemption. Vanessa's professional assignment became a battle for her own identity. Gregory's night of survival may have released dangers that will affect others for years to come. The animatronics themselves, whether possessed, programmed, or something between, represent humanity's complicated relationship with its creations. We build things to serve our needs, to fulfill our desires, to replace what we've lost. But these creations carry forward not just our intentions, but our flaws, our traumas, our unexamined assumptions about the world. The corporate structure of Fazbear Entertainment demonstrates how institutional momentum can perpetuate harm long after individual bad actors have departed. Policies designed to limit liability became blueprints for enabling tragedy. Denial of problems became so entrenched that it influenced architectural decisions, building new structures atop unaddressed ruins. The digital evolution of the threat from physical animatronics to virtual entities like Glitch Trap, reflects anxieties about technology's role in preserving and transmitting both information and malevolence. Code can carry corruption across platforms and generations in ways physical objects cannot. Digital resurrection offers a kind of immortality, but at what cost to human identity and agency? The recurring theme of family throughout the narrative, the Afton, the Emilys, the Murrays, emphasizes how personal relationships become distorted when filtered through tragedy and obsession. Parents trying to protect or resurrect children, siblings carrying guilt or seeking revenge, generations inheriting consequences of choices they didn't make. These patterns repeat with variations throughout the timeline. Conclusion: the eternal performance. As we reach the end of this complete chronicle, it's worth reflecting on why these stories of mechanical horrors and possessed pizzeras resonate so deeply. Perhaps it's because they transform familiar, comfortable spaces, family restaurants, children's entertainment, places meant for joy and celebration into sources of dread. Or perhaps it's because they explore fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and what happens when human essence intersects with mechanical existence. The timeline we've traced tonight spans roughly 60 years, from the early partnerships of the 1970s to the digital hauntings of the 2030s. Across these decades, technology advanced, corporate structures evolved, but the core human drives, grief, ambition, love, revenge, remained constant. These drives, when channeled through mechanical mediums, created the unique horror that defines the Five Nights at Freddy's narrative. Every pizzeria that opened carried forward shadows from those that came before. Every animatronic built incorporated lessons learned from previous tragedies, though never the right lessons. Every attempt to contain or control the spreading corruption only transformed it into new configurations. The story became less about individual incidents and more about patterns that repeated with increasing complexity. The children who became victims, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, Charlotte, Elizabeth, and unnamed others, were denied the futures they should have had. Instead, they became part of a different story, one written in circuits and servos, played out in endless nights of confusion and anger. Their spirits, whether freed or still trapped, represent innocence transformed by adult failures into something that can never fully return to its original state. The adults who created this situation, William with his obsessions, Henry with his innovations, Edwin with his grief, acted from intensely human motivations that became inhuman through their expression. They sought to create, to preserve, to understand, but their methods, divorced from wisdom and compassion, produced only expanding circles of harm. The timeline suggests that while specific threats might be contained or destroyed, the underlying potential for similar tragedies persists. As long as humans create mechanical servants, as long as we try to preserve what's lost through technology, as long as corporate structures prioritize profit over people, the conditions exist for new iterations of these same patterns. Yet within the darkness of this narrative, small lights persist. Glamrock Freddy's protection of Gregory shows that even corrupted systems can produce unexpected kindness. The spirits finding release through fire and closure demonstrates that even the deepest traumas can eventually heal. Cassie's loyalty to her friend, though manipulated and betrayed, represents the human connections that motivate us to face dangers we don't fully understand. As the night grows deep and sleep beckons, let these stories of mechanical mysteries and digital ghosts fade into the background hum of dreams. The complete timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's stands as a modern mythology, a cautionary tale dressed in jump scares and puzzle pieces, reminding us that our creations carry forward more than just our intentions. They carry our essences, our failures, our unresolved shadows that wait patiently in dark corners for their time to perform. The animatronics have powered down for now. Their stage is dark, their voices silent. But somewhere in abandoned pizzerias and digital networks, in corporate archives and corrupted code, the performance continues. The music box plays its tiny melody. The mechanical eyes observe from shadows. The story waits to resume, patient as only machines can be, eternal as only nightmares are. Rest well and dream carefully. The timeline is complete, but the shadows it casts stretch far into futures we haven't yet imagined. In the quiet hours, before dawn, when mechanical sounds could be settling buildings or something more purposeful, remember that some stories end not with resolution, but with the understanding that they never truly end at all. They simply wait for the next night to begin their performance once again. Thank you for joining me through this complete journey into the heart of Fazbear Entertainment's dark legacy. May your dreams be free of mechanical footsteps and golden suits, and may you wake to a world where pizzeria animatronics remain safely in the realm of fiction, where they can frighten and fascinate without ever truly threatening. Until next time, when another story needs telling in the gentle hours of night, sleep well and remember, it's amazing what we can survive until 6 a.m., whether in games, in stories, or in the quiet battles we fight in our own dark hours. The timeline rests, complete, but never finished. A circle that ends where it began with simple dreams of bringing joy to children, transformed through human failing into something far more complex, far more lasting, far more meaningful than anyone could have imagined when two inventors first shook hands and decided to build mechanical performers for family restaurants. Good night.